All right. Tom, welcome to the Lustra Labs podcast. We're thankful to have you. We're excited to hear about your story and all the work you've done with Collateral Base, which you are the managing director. Is that right?
Yep. We started in 20. And so I guess this is our fifth year in operations. It's a very interesting industry. And so we've done several reinventions, and I'm sure we'll have several more reinventions as we go forward. But, thanks for having me, and, shout out to Lustra Labs.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you mentioned it's an interesting industry. Before we met, it wasn't specifically clear what industry you're in, but we had a little bit of chance to talk. And if you could just clarify a little bit about how you've carved out your specific niche in the industry of cannabis.
Yeah, that's right. And so, well, it's a business consulting company, obviously, but and then that's one of the reasons why it's collateral based, because we like to look at assets. After I got out of law school back in 2008, I briefly became a stockbroker, but it was just the wrong time, obviously, because 2008 was not the best returns that anybody's ever gotten. And so I became a practicing lawyer, was in banking law for about 10 years, and then I wanted to do something a little bit more entrepreneurial. And so I broke off on my own. And I saw that Illinois was going to, because that's where I'm located, is in Illinois. They were the first state to have the legislature actually vote for it. Most of the states that have legalized it in their state did it through ballot initiative. For example, right now they're working on Oklahoma and Florida. And so every election cycle that goes on, you usually hear it being on the ballot in some states. We're not allowed to do that in our state. We don't really trust our electorate, and our state's pretty rigged in Illinois. Like, it really is run by 60 Democrats in the General Assembly in Springfield. That's it. And so, however, in 2019, those 60 Democrats decided to legalize it. And so I saw an opportunity to use the background in banking and finance that I had to put together these really complex regulatory maze kind of models for the applications. And so your application in any particular state can be hundreds of pages long. And so you have to read the statutes and the rules, which could be hundreds of pages long, and then make sure that every aspect of that is in your application so that you get what they call all the points. As I said, we've had to reinvent. Most states don't do that anymore. In fact, it's now a red flag when I see a state doing that, because it means that the administration of that state doesn't want their program to get started. Because every time they do that, you're going to have a merit based. So you're going to read a phone book, essentially. The apps that I had to do in Illinois 5 years ago, they'd be 400 pages long.
Wow.
And right. And so then KPMG is going to sub that work out to somebody who graduated from B school, and then I created some algorithm that does a control F on the whole application to make sure that you've checked all these boxes. And that's before the grift, people that are hiring lobbyists, and because it's all secrets. And then the administration makes a decision, a final decision, and then you have to fight City Hall and sue the state when they screw up your application. And they will. One of my clients wins. Another of my clients completely loses.
And it's almost illogical. There's no rhyme or reason. It's just...
Well, I wrote both of their applications. I know exactly what I put in, and I'm like, well, this part of the application was perfect over there for that applicant and 0 on this applicant. And so that always happens. And so every state that has that type of style, there's a lawsuit, and then it prevents the thing from happening for years. So Georgia is an example of that. Alabama, ongoing example of it. Back in the day when I was getting started, you had New Jersey as an example of that. Texas will be an example of that, but Texas just did a surprise round. Utah did a surprise round the month before. Utah will be another example of that, and so will Texas, because they have these merit-based. The state is hiring a consulting company to pick the best from a phone book of who wins. And because of all of that, it makes it very easy for that winner to be somebody who is the governor's buddy. Yeah.
That is such interesting insight. I've always assumed things like that, from the outsider, just completely layman. You don't know this industry. You kind of wonder why there's so much gray area, in an industry, especially like cannabis. And you've sort of elucidated that it sort of serves whatever higher purpose to just be so gray and so non-matter of fact. There isn't an actual rule set. There isn't an actual logical process. It's just kind of whatever's whatever's good for those, I guess, who need to maintain that power, if you will.
The regulators and the states have quite a lot of power. And part of that is because there's a vacuum at the federal level. There's been no guidance from the feds. The only thing that they've really done is corrupted the whole federal system with their definition of hemp because they defined the difference between marijuana and hemp on a federal level in a very stark way. Marijuana, Schedule 1 substance under federal law under the Controlled Substances Act, right alongside heroin for some reason. It's been there the whole time since 1970, tantamount under the law, at least, as heroin. And then in 2018, the Senate and the Congress, they voted to create hemp as a new definition. And the difference between marijuana and hemp is a chemical the plant doesn't even make. So that's strange. So, like, basically, under federal law right now, all unlit cannabis is hemp. But as soon as you spark the joint, it becomes marijuana. And they're fixing that. But that has created this huge industry in hemp. And you see the beverages everywhere now, which they're still illegal because you're not allowed to put drugs into the food supply. It's one of the reasons why when you go to the breakfast aisle, there's not Ozempic O's, like you can't do that.
That's an
But
interesting.
that's true. But then like the enforcement arm is completely different. And so like you're getting a letter from the FDA saying stop it versus the DEA and their buddies at the Department of Justice are kicking down your door, taking all your stuff, and then prosecuting you. That's much different, And so that's why these beverages are everywhere and they'll have like THC or CBD in it, despite them being controlled substances, controlled drug substances. And because of that, they are all failing to comply with the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, while still like the labels at those beverages when you go to like Total Wine or Benny's Beverage Depot, they try to comply with the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act in labeling, but then the product that they've labeled is misbranded. It's funny. For me, for being like a lawyer in the cannabis industry, I'm like, oh, how droll. For everybody else, they don't care. They just want to make some money on the beverages.
Well, what's interesting, again, from an outsider's perspective, is I lived in San Francisco for about 18 years. I was on the lawns when, smoking weed was cool and everyone was just kind of doing it on their own. And, but then I also saw the transformation of the industry and it welcoming like the actual business industrial side of it. And I remember there was that transition period and I thought just as an end consumer, oh, it's been figured out. There's been a lot of alignment now amongst the feds and the state. And it's is clearly based on everything that you're saying. There's still so much, how do I say it? Just not just disruption, but misalignment between, and that causes a lot of chaos and a lot of uncertainty. And I think it's important to say that because what you've done is you've found a particular industry and niche that you focus on where you offer a lot of clarity for your customers, ultimately people who turn to you, that you've helped dozens, if maybe not hundreds at this point, to navigate the landscape, navigate the uncertainty, understand. I think another thing you mentioned earlier was you help kind of also foresee in certain jurisdictions where opportunities are coming up for clients because they might want to acquire new licenses. Is that all true?
Yeah. And so we really, and like we've had to pivot. And so because that game of that merit based application, that doesn't work anymore. And so, like, you're in California, they don't have those. Michigan don't have them. New Mexico, New Jersey, they don't have them. But you still need an application. You still need a complete application that might be 100 pages for compliance purposes. Because the application is basically like a rule book for how your company is going to do the business with the license compliantly. No different than if you had a casino or a bank. However, the difference, of course, is that what your product is still a Schedule 1 substance or a completely unscheduled substance if it's not lit on fire, because a lot of the product that you can buy at your local dispensary does technically qualify as hemp if we ignore a particular holding of law called the source rule. Anyway, that is what we help with. But then if we're in New Jersey, it's different, because now it's like, of course we have this application for you. And we don't have to worry about the lawsuits. Now we have to worry about the local communities, getting it zoned, making sure that people don't try to rip you off as you're getting operational and that kind of stuff. In other jurisdictions, for example, Kentucky and Illinois, many of them, Rhode Island will be coming up, Delaware last year. They do lotteries. And so then it becomes a compliance numbers game. So, how many times can you apply in compliance with the law so that you can have statistical edge to win a license and then get it stood up and operational? And you have to completely follow the law while doing that. And it can be very, very difficult. And so, like, I read that Cresco, they're a publicly traded company, they did 120 apps in Kentucky. We did 260 for our clients. And, they were all compliant. But it's a lottery. And so, like, they had like a 1 to 2% chance each of winning. And so, it's like, how many did you win? What's your percentage? It's like, well, we won the license, the lot, our clients won the lottery, but of course, like, most of them didn't, because it's a lottery. And so that's a different aspect of the game. And then there's just like
Do people
acquisition.
are those numbers ultimately published for people to see, like, the totals of who wins and who loses and who submitted their applications to
They
try.
very often can be, yes,
Okay,
but then also no. And so, like, Utah just closed, but they're a merit based style. Makes me think that somebody has already gotten that one license they're giving away. Only 14 teams applied. And so it really depends on how the state has written their law or their rules to determine whether or not that stuff's considered confidential. In my state of Illinois, a lot of that stuff's considered confidential. You can ask the regulator to disclose it, and they'll say, no, I don't have to. Read the section of the law. Others, you have to. And that's just kind of the game that I'm in. I should have also just turned off my, just should have gone to do not disturb, because if it's a day during the week, during business hours, my phone will go off.
so could you share a little bit more about who your ideal client is? I'm actually wondering that in the back of my mind. Who will
Uh,
typically contact you, and who's looking for these licenses? And are they repeat? Are they already in the business? Are they net
yeah.
new? Are they foreigners?
We'll make you into an MSO, or we'll help you be more of an MSO. And so an MSO is a multi-state operator. So the clients may have, 3, 4 dispensaries in, like, say, Missouri, or in maybe like 8 or 9 in Washington State. And then they might be interested in expanding into a new market. And so that would be an ideal client. There's not that many. There's only 15,000 dispensaries in the whole country. And so I'd say about half of them are multi-owner, and like half are probably, one-off mom and pops. That might be a little skewed. It might actually be 2/3 are multi-owner and a third are mom and pops. And so the mom and pops, they probably aren't, our target. But then the ones that own multiples, they are. And then the ones that have a footprint in more than one state, but then don't have an internal team like ours. And so that would be the publicly traded ones, not the top tier. So, like, Cresco has their own internal team, but they're in top tier. So, like, us trying to get like Cresco or Verano or Trueleaf, I mean, we'll do the work if we can get the client, but they typically have their own internal teams that have been helping them throughout the years to do them. But then you get into like the tier twos and the tier threes, where they don't have the staff or the capacity to be like, well, here's this new statute, here's all these new rules. Well, we memorized them, and this is what we think is compliant, and we've been talking to the regulators, and they've been pointing us back to the statutes that, or the rules that say what we interpret them to say. So we think that this is the way to do it. And so, like, that is maybe 60, 80 companies, and there's some tools that we can use to find them, send them an email if you want, but a lot of it's personal relationship marketing.
Gotcha. Yeah, and so it sounds, you describe those as a few different tiers of client, and you can be in tier one, but like you said, you find that some of these tend to have their own teams, and then in the tier two, tier three, what you are able to do is, of course, it's almost seems obvious for anyone that's looking into this, is you guys study these laws, you guys have the knowledge when it comes to, just like you said, sometimes their knowledge can be a little bit delayed, or there's just some latency there. And so the fact that you guys are staying up on that, you really bring that edge, and you do this repetitively, right? For anyone that has any knowledge of this, it's like in-house, you might get to know some of the laws, you might have a peripheral view of things, but this is what you guys do for your business, and this is the value that you bring to your customers, right?
Oh yeah, and so like these laws are updated all the time. And so I sent an email to a client, a couple months ago, and I'm like, no, I don't think that one's going to work because that one says this in this statute, and somebody else in the team just emails everybody right back, and just like, no, no, they updated that. It's effective July 1st. I'm like, son of a, you're right. They did. Okay. I withdraw what I just said. The law was right until yesterday
Until
when they changed it. And so that happens all the time. So we have to do a lot of, oh, we better go check it because Missouri's changing theirs right now. And so, like, how we helped our clients in Missouri is not how we're going to help our clients in Missouri in the future, unless we want to get in trouble, and we don't want to get in trouble.
I mean, I see that as the real value add, right? Is someone comes with you and they're ensuring that they have the best possible opportunity to get that license, to be up to date with the statutes, and be given that, like, the best opportunity, of course, versus spending all that time. You have your team, but they're not up to date. You work and work, and then it's just you're omitted from the process, or you're kicked out because you just didn't know the latest information.
There's that. And then, of course, like for like the states like Utah and Texas and the other merit-based states where they're going to screw up. So like I've sued on those, and so then I can make a referral. I mean, like we try to make this as complete and as defensible as possible. That's a consulting contract. Here's my law firm. I'm going to make you a referral, and then like I'm not licensed in Utah, so I'd have to pro hac vice in there and find local counsel. Texas, we have an attorney that I work with who's getting barred down there, and I think they'll probably sit on those licenses for a while, but there's going to be a lawsuit in Texas for like 15 new licenses, and there's about 140 applications chasing those. In Texas, it's going to be more like an Alabama situation where you have to, so let's say you didn't win. You have to say, well, they shouldn't have won, and argue that and destroy that whole process to get the rescore, because the statute won't allow you to just flex up. Now, Utah's a little different. Those are under rules. And so you might be able to get some more equitable treatment in Utah than you would in Texas. But then what happens very often, like in my state of Illinois, the legislature saw this huge cluster mess that they created, and they authorized additional licenses. And so that may be what happens in Texas, because you're talking about a state who's shutting down its hemp industry that has 8,000 operators in it. 8,000. And the definition of hemp and then Schedule 3 marijuana, those are federal changes that we can get into. But the states have started regulating hemp because, again, the way that they defined it under federal law was a chemical the plant does not make. That's what happens after you light it on fire or like cook it into brownies or process it. And so like they're like, oops. And they've seen the problem that they've created, and they're working on a fix. And so many of the states have done the same thing, especially if they already have their own cannabis program. They aren't going to just be like, no, you can't sell it as hemp because it hasn't been lit on fire yet. That counts as marijuana in Michigan or in Missouri, for example. But in Texas, they didn't have that. And the Texas legislature only meets every other year. It's like basically a volunteer organization. And so if the laws don't change, if it doesn't change, and then you've got 2 more years before it might change. And so like right now, they've called a special session to change it. But then all the legislatures went to Illinois so that they can't redistrict Texas and get 5 more Republican seats for the next congressional election. So being in the industry, you see a lot of politics and a lot of you being like, step aside, get to the back of the bus. You're not important. And so you see a lot of that federally, or even from the states, where they just think that you're not important, get a real job. And so it's fascinating to see the industry kind of evolve, but it's been very hamstrung by federal law. And also, so that in all these states, they don't have any guidance from the feds. There's no, here's how to do this. And so they did that for hemp, and they really screwed up things, but they haven't done it for cannabis yet. And so as a result, you have all these states doing it their own way, and there's no uniformity. And that makes it's an opportunity for a niche consulting business. It really is, because then, every time the federal law changes, like with OBA, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, there's stuff in there, or like, I guess more germane to your audience might be the Genius Act for stablecoins. Boy, like you could have backed the truck up and buy some Ethereum 3 months ago, and you would have done pretty well. because the stable coin looks like they're going to be using Ethereum as its kind of like base technology. Those types of things could happen at the federal level very soon. And by very soon, I mean like it's the holidays because, when you're a senator or a congressman, you shouldn't have to work too hard. You're up for reelection again. And so you take the entire month of August off. And then that's not enough. You usually take the first weekend of September off, and then you come back after Labor Day.
After Labor Day.
Yeah. And so that's what we're waiting for. We're waiting for after Labor Day. And I think what you're going to see after Labor Day is a new definition of hemp and Schedule 3 marijuana. And so Schedule 3 marijuana is what Donald Trump likes to look for. It's an 80-20 issue. You might not know it, but medical cannabis has 90% approval when they poll. 90% of Americans think it should be a thing, and it's not federally.
Federally.
Right. And so that's one of those issues where, well, if you shut that down and you're trying to be popular going into the midterms, and this has traditionally been a Democratic issue, why wouldn't you push that through? Because it's popular and you steal a Democratic issue, So I think that's going to happen. And then there's two beefing senators from Kentucky going over like what the definition of hemp is. Now, one's Mitch McConnell, and he championed hemp in 2018 with that farm bill. He was the guy who was talking about it, and he hates marijuana. Like the whole point of it was to not get high. And so now he's seen what's happened and he's like, this is terrible. Let's shut it down. And so his version of the bill completely got rid of THC from hemp, which is just not how the cannabis plant works. The best you can do is maybe a 20-to-1 ratio of CBD to THC. And so they didn't define it that way, which was stupid, but they could have. And so anyway, they're fixing that definition. And Rand Paul, the other senator from Kentucky, is defending the THC in hemp. And so he objected to McConnell's bill and filed his own amendment. But if you read both of them, they're very similar. They both get rid of seeds. They both get rid of synthetic THC. And so the vast majority, if you go to the store and you see those beverages, if there's an 80% chance that beverage has semi-synthetic THC. They took CBD isolate, they did chemistry, and they turned it into Delta-9 THC. And then they put it in your drink and they sold it to you.
Yeah, you always figure anything mass produced in the industrial food chain, they eventually get, to the synthetic version of things. There's that seems like it's the only way that they can mass produce things like that.
Like high fructose corn syrup to a certain extent. But high fructose corn syrup is legal and it's grass and it's not a drug. So with the stuff that they've been putting into the drinks, the regulation at the federal level stops once it's been harvested. The FDA never wrote any rules. The FDA just sends letters like, don't put this in drinks. People just keep putting it in drinks. And so what the difference between the senators' bills was that Rand Paul's allowed for a trace amount of THC to stay in the finished product. What that trace is, I don't know. Like he was still using the 0.3% Delta-9 THC. That doesn't, okay. Like, well, let's imagine a can of Coke. Everybody understands a can of Coke, probably. If you look at some nutrition facts, you'll see it has about 40 grams of sugar. Well, now we're into the milligram math because my dispensary, I'm only allowed to sell gummies that have a limit of 10 milligrams and a package limit of 100 milligrams under the Illinois rules that legalized cannabis, 5-6 years ago. But this hemp for THC, if there's 40 grams of sugar, you would multiply that by, 10 to turn it into milligrams. It would be 10, actually. I think it'd be 100. So it'd be like 40,000 milligrams of sugar are already diluted into that beverage. How much THC could you then dilute into it to be under that 0.3? Almost a gram. So like you could have 1,000 milligram can of Coke under the reading of Rand Paul's bill and have that be considered hemp, which is insane. Like that's like 10x what I'm legally allowed to sell as cannabis under my license. So I think the problem was like Mitch McConnell's version said any quantifiable amount. And I think they need to change that to excessive and then put like a cap of 2 to 5 milligrams per unit and like 20 milligrams or something like that, or maybe 50 milligrams. If we look to Minnesota, they codified hemp, low dose hemp, so that they fixed all these problems. And so you could have a 5 milligram drink and a 50 milligram product total. So like, you could have more. You could sell a 12 pack, I guess. Like, nope, that might put you over because that would be 60. You could sell a 10 pack. 5 milligrams times 10. You could ship a 10 pack of those beverages. I hope that's where hemp goes. We'll have to wait and see after it gets back. But that would shut down. They wanted to shut down seeds. Seeds is a huge market. They wanted to shut down synthetics. Like most of those beverages are coming down because then they have to go back to only natural THC, which is going to put the price of them quite a bit higher.
Hmm.
And then, we have to determine how much THC are going to be in these hemp beverages and products. And then you make marijuana Schedule 3. That's where things in this industry start to get really interesting. And so some of the people that are into finance, and this may be a finance centered podcast, they may know about the MSOS, is an ETF that tracks the publicly traded, mostly in Canada, cannabis companies. And in the past week, it's up 30%. It's very volatile, but it's all off of this news that Trump is going to tell us in the next few weeks what his plans are for marijuana. And also, it looks like for hemp, this will be a blueprint probably for the next 5 to 10 years. And so there's going to be a big opportunity for those license holders to be a lot more profitable and for investors to maybe come back because the investors got very burned in cannabis, like over the past 5 years, like
Yeah.
negative 90%. You thought Bitcoin had a big drawdown? No. Yeah.
Try cannabis. Yeah, I
Right.
remember that in the markets for sure. Tom, you've shared so much insight, and clearly you, as the managing director of your company, of the consulting company, has so much knowledge in the political space, the legal space, and how all these things interact, even the financial and economical impacts these have. I wanted to make sure and notify people who are listening in that you actually cover quite a bit of this in your podcast. And it seems like you've had this podcast for some time where you review a lot of these laws, you give your perspective on everything that we've discussed here, but in a much more thorough, there's dozens of podcasts that you've had. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, and so like we've had a lot of guests on. We like a lot of the people from the industry. They have publicists and they email me about to try to get on the show. But it's cannabis legalization news. You can help us get to 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. We're at about 74,000.
I see
And
that.
so,
Congratulations.
yeah, it's when I started it, after Illinois was going to legalize, and so we've been around for about 6 years. And because of the content, you get shadow banned, you get demonetized, and you get 18 plus. And so it's harder to get the word out there than if we were like beer and pizza. What a combination! That's a winning combination. And so, like for example, Stripe, the payment processor from Ireland, they will shut you down and kick you out if they find out that you're related to the cannabis industry. Even like if you're an ancillary, they will shut you down and kick you out. And yet they have a podcast. It's called like Pints and Founders or something, where they literally pour a beer in a bar and their founder talks to other tech founders. And I'm like, it's so hypocritical. You cancel us, but then you're going to go have a beer with another founder. And so like, where's the parity? Where's the justice? It's in the future.
In
We'll
the
see.
future.
But yeah, cannabis legalization news, anywhere you get your podcasts. And then of course you can see a lot more on.
Wonderful. Cool. And is that your primary platform? Is YouTube cannabis legalization news?
Yeah, I mean, like it's YouTube first, and so I do a lot more videos than we do like a weekly live podcast that goes out to the podcast verse. Don't get me wrong, we're kind of changing the show format now to allow for more guests and for more sponsors to be on the podcast, but it'll still be approximately an hour, every week. Typically, if there's news that's going on, like I said, Congress is on vacation. So, like, if we didn't have people that want to come on the show, we could take next week off because nothing's going to happen between now and after September or whenever Labor Day is this year.
And who would you suggest is the best person to listen to that podcast? Who's going to get the most value from it, and what kind of
Yeah,
information?
owners, and so like owners and employees in the industry. So there's about 500,000 employees in the industry. They aren't counted, and so like if Trump really wants to have a blowout jobs report, count the 500,000 people that are on plant touching licenses, because like there's about 15,000 dispensaries, and hopefully all the license holders tune in. But then there's thousands of growers as well, and thousands of processors. So there's probably about 30,000 licenses in the total industry base. And then that 30,000 licenses employs about 500,000 Americans, and they aren't counted. And so moving into Schedule 3, and then That still might not be enough to get them counted because it's still illegal. That's the Schedule 3 is going to be great, but the problem then is marijuana is not an FDA approved drug. And so it's going to be an unapproved Schedule 3 substance. So there's still not a pathway for legal transactions in the product. So it's still going to be hard for banking. It's still going to be a crime to a certain extent. It's just not as bad of a crime. And as a result, hopefully now what we're going to have is Congress acting to create a nationwide medical cannabis framework to ensure purity, dosage, standardization, and interstate commerce. And that would greatly help curtail the ongoing illicit use and illicit industry, but it will take congressional action. And will it happen? They haven't done anything in 50 years except for make it like be tough on crime. Hopefully now that this will be Schedule 3, we won't be labeled as crime, but the law has really only gotten worse over the past 50 years, more draconian. This will be the first liberalization and, the small L term of, Republicans saying they hate regulation. Well, this would be much less regulation if they actually give us some type of rules.
Great. Yeah, and I feel like you've peppered in. I just want to make sure I do cover everything that you wanted to discuss, and that was the federal Schedule 3. But I feel like I've heard that quite a bit. You've brought that up, but is there anything else that you wanted to mention about the federal Schedule 3, just specifically, or?
Yeah, it will help the tax burden, which will be a wonderful thing. However, what it won't help with is the interstate commerce, the legality of it. So you move it to Schedule 3, now you're just not overly taxed. All the industry is still kind of illegal until there is a federal system in place to give us rules. And maybe Trump can do this with an executive order, but somewhere between the executive power and the Controlled Substances Act actual text is a line. And so like previously with the Obama administration, the Cole memo from 2009 ago, they gave guidance to the federal enforcement as to what their priorities were. And like, if they are doing these things, they are not a priority to enforce. That's kind of like the limit that the executive branch has. They have the ability to put into Schedule 3, and then they could say, like, provided that the licenses are doing X, Y, and Z, and they have a valid license in their state, but they can't codify that. And so that's where Congress needs to come in and say, look, if we want a nationwide market, if we want a set of rules for governing THC, here it is. And so I hope that that's what we get. I hope that, even if they completely ban THC from hemp, okay, now if you want that THC, you're going to have to figure out how to put it back into the food supply for marijuana. And that's where I hope this is all going. Now, it's not going to be full legalization, but it's going to be medical legalization.
Got it. Thank you for sharing that, for that clarity. And yeah, you've mentioned this, but I do want to clarify for anyone listening here. It's a focused podcast for finance industry specifically. But another thing that we discuss is technology. And so I'm just wondering, is there anything that you're seeing right now in your industry, or even in your own company, where AI has impacted? I know this is kind of a curveball here. I mean, we mostly talked about legislation and legal sides of things, but just wanted to get your perspective on anything from a technology standpoint. If there's either something that's been changed as a result in a positive way, or maybe things that you see in your own business. I think you had mentioned something about the uniqueness of your lead qualification. We could talk about that, but yeah, just wondering if there's anything from a technology and AI perspective that you can touch on in this specific business.
Yeah, I mean, AI is touching everything. And so like we covered the MSOS and the financial aspects of it pretty well. We haven't talked on like the actual technology that's involved. And so Ragged Tech is huge in the industry. There's like point of sale systems like Dutchy and FlowHub. There's also Metric and BioTrack, and those are like seed to sale inventory monitoring and control. Some try to get in on regulatory, like OBO, I think is a regulatory data set where they go and they mine the data even at the municipal level, because like in your state of California, they have the state rules and then the municipality can set the rules as well. And so you have two licenses, and those are the players that are there. But like for our usage, yeah, we use GHL for our AI intake process. And so somebody calls, and if they don't if they actually like give the AI agent data as opposed to being like, I want to talk to a human. And then sometimes that's like a red flag for us. I'm like, person probably can't afford us. And so like they will they will harvest the data, they will send us an email, they will put it into the CRM, then they're on a drip for the automations to warm them up, introduce who we are, all that kind of stuff, qualify them. And very often, like, let's be honest, the market of our ideal customers is quite small. You could probably fit them all on an airplane. And as a result, we do make a lot of referrals out to, well, check out the podcast. And then, every now and then they might want a legal file, and I refer them over to my law firm for M&A or for litigation. And GHL helps us a lot on that. I hear that Lustra Labs has got some products that, do those types of things. Interested in hearing more about it, because the better our customer experience for, calling us, emailing us, filling out our forms on our website, and follow up. That's a very important aspect of your business, that customer service aspect. And so now we have to get our dispensaries one going. I'm planning on setting it up through GHL with various systems that go through, build up our email list. GHL is it's like HubSpot and Mailchimp and AI, and it does a lot, which is it does a lot, which is cool, but it could be a little overwhelming for some of the employees. So very often I'm the one putting it together, or me or somebody else that I've trust and hired, and then testing it. So that really helps. And then let's, for example, say we are trying to check our work. Google's million context window for Gemini 2.5 Pro is excellent, because you can take the entire statute, you can take the municipal code, you can take the regulations that the state has put out too, and throw that all into a chat with Gemini, and you maybe are getting at like 100,000 tokens, and that would be like if it's huge. And so then you can take your entire application, which might be 200,000 tokens, and now you're at 300,000 tokens, and then you can cross check it and be like, is everything in, like, find out where it is. Notebook LM is another effective one at that aspect of cross checking, and it really has to do with Google made an amazing LLM with a huge context window, and then put that out, and their TPUs as opposed to NVIDIA's GPUs is very good at catching those little details. And so, we didn't have the ability to do that type of fly specking check
Oh,
5 years ago. And
no.
so, yeah,
How long have you been using it? Gemini.
of since it came out, and so like it 2.5 was noticeably better. And so, like, we use all the models, and then we'll have them argue, sometimes. And then there's ways that you can reduce hallucinations the best, because like I'm a practicing lawyer as well, and you hear bad stories about lawyers not fact checking their chat GPT before they put it in the brief. And so, like, if it cites you a case, the trick on that one is, if you find any cases that you cite, give me a link to the case, because then if it's making up a case, it's not going to be able to find it. But even then, let's say that you've had it, cite a case in some brief that you're working on with the AI, read the case, because like the AI might not be citing it correctly. And so, they're wonderful tools, but you can't just, it's not, they aren't God. They aren't great. They are wonderful
They are
tools, but you
tools. That's
have
all
to,
they are tools.
yes, yes,
It's
and
not
then
an
verify.
yes, it's not an excuse to replace your workforce, or it's not even an excuse to replace your ownership of like knowledge and knowing things. You have to, it's kind of the same thing that any automation tool has ever been. It's garbage in, garbage out. Yes, it has increased fidelity. Yes, it has increased, for those who are asking the right questions, we see the efficiency. But I'm glad you mentioned that, because we're still in that period where it's doing incredible things, but if we give the robots all of the responsibility, we're going to get burned, and we're going to look like fools. And a lot of times in my specific industry, the one big thing right now is people are asking, well, can't AI just build an app? And it can, but what the huge difference is, there are things, it depends. Are you trying to build like a proof of concept that isn't in production? Or are you trying, if you're trying to build something that's enterprise grade, HIPAA compliant, multiple, there's two-factor authentication, there's just or database. There's no way that AI is coming close to that. Like, and
Your
they'll,
dev may be able to go a lot faster,
yes,
but you still need the developer. Like, I'll try to vibe code something, and I haven't done any of that in over a decade. And so, like, no, I've forgotten how to use GitHub. And so, like, Codex is telling me how to set up in GitHub, and I'm like, you're going too fast. And so, like, I need to go if I wanted to do that, and I don't have enough time. But like, I would have to go get certified in GitHub, figure that out, and then go back to try to vibe code something. Because if you don't understand how it works, it's just not going to work. And so, like, the same thing with being a lawyer or being an engineer or I mean, it's garbage in, garbage out. And so it's a very powerful tool. It's great, but it is just a tool, and it does not take the place of you. And like, it can help you audit what you're doing. It can help you maybe like look at something differently, and it can write way faster than you can write. Like,
yes,
hands down, like, it cannot, nobody can write as fast as these things.
no,
However, then you still have to read it and see if it makes sense and if it's applicable to what you're trying to do. And so, like, it would be the exact same thing if I was more versed in code as opposed to in law. I'd see what it prints out, and then I'd try to like put it in there. And if it's breaking, I'd be like, oh, there it is. I wouldn't have done that. And so, like, if you don't have that skill, you just can't have it code an app. Like, you just can't have it be your lawyer. You just can't have it do your taxes. Maybe in 5 years, but not right
maybe
now.
not right now. Yeah, that's a maybe that'll be one of the titles of one of the pieces of the content that we split out is like, don't worry, AI is not taking over the world yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
It can help you. It's a tool, and so, like, we were pretty crap at building houses before hammers, but then you get a hammer, and now suddenly you can drive nails into things that, otherwise you would just break your hand. And so it can help you go up a level, but you need to. It's like a horse. Like, you're riding the horse. It's the horse, and so you have to have control over it to see if it's and verify what its outputs are.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing that we're constantly testing. I mean, as a dev, company having these resources, we're certainly pushing the boundaries of what, the individual components and how quickly we write things. And the regression tests, we very often have to dispel the myth of, can't AI just do all this? And it's great because you get to come up with you get to use AI to create some good POCs, right? That give a lot of fidelity around the vision of what something might be. And so it's good. Like, again, in every aspect, we do see the efficiencies, but it's cool to hear from your perspective as well, the limitations, even though it has, I would say, impacted your business significantly, and I'm sure made things much more efficient. I mean, goodness, the ability, like you said, you mentioned, I don't, we're kind of getting to the end here, but it was cool to hear how you had landed on Gemini because, of course, it's one of the best for the type of industry that you're in. Not sure if you just knew that right out the back, or if
We run the company on Google. So, like, as a result, like, Google has just been dripping in Gemini into their suite of products, like their hard drive and whatnot. And so now, my gosh, like, file management and file administration, you have to keep things organized, obviously. But let's say you have kept things organized, but now you just have like dozens and dozens and dozens of files. You can talk to Gemini, and it'll go find it in the hard drive and bring it up for you and just be like, hey, there was this contract from 2 years ago with this client. What did it say there? And just being able to ask that to your hard drive, and it gives you an answer, is amazing.
is
And
amazing.
it's great. And so, like,
Some
how
people
much
would say
time did
it's
that?
scary, but it's also amazing.
Right, right, right. Because, like, sure, I could have spent the time. Click, click. Oh, here's the Nope, that's the wrong one. Click. Okay, this is the contract. Scan, 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 scan. There's a provision. Like, 15 minutes later, I would have
Yeah.
had my answer. Now it's like 5 seconds. And so, like, it freed up like minutes of my time, which is great that it's able to do that. If I have to serve discovery on somebody, like, here's the facts. Here's how they kind of interact. This is what we're going after. Zing. Here's like 20 discovery response or questions to give this person. And then you don't just sit there and go, thanks, AI, and send it. No, but you were able to do your discovery, maybe not in 2 or 3 hours, but in one. And so that's the power of the leverage that AI is giving us.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe as a final closing question for you, since clearly you are, I would call it, a very power user when it comes to AI, is there anything that you've come across where if you had a magic wand, you would put something together that would automate maybe multiple processes? Are there things that you're doing that you're like, man, if I could just make this happen, put this together and do these things, like, is there something like that, like a process that you've thought of?
Yeah, we're building that in GHL. And so GHL is an affiliate market. GHL is a software MLM almost. And so they have
And CR, just for anybody listening, it's a customer relationship management tool. It helps you keep track of all of your leads, all of your customers.
yeah, and send them emails, post on your social media. They'll take phone calls, do automated email follow-ups, SMS messages, all of that great stuff. Even your chat widget on your website. And so right now what we're building is modular automated sequencing for lawyers, or perhaps like abstracted into any other service industry for the call. Cause like I'm pretty good at SEO. And so like the call comes in, great. Now you need to qualify the call, give them a quick consultation, calendar all that. If the consultation goes well, spit out the contract, send the invoice, mark them, and tag them the whole way. And so it's about 7 steps, and hopefully I have that done, in the next month or two. And then after I have that, then I can affiliate marketing that. Be like, hey, we love it. We use it all the time. And then if you have any questions, I'll sell you my funnel that I use at the law firm for X. And just that's how a lot of the GHL is done. And a lot of the agencies that are out there helping mom and pops or SMBs or even middle markets sell their products online more effectively and efficiently with those automations. It's a process that we're working on now. I'd love to see what other solutions are out there, and then when those solutions, after you get it, can I resell it to other people that are in my boat?
And that's the great thing about GHL, right? Is you do have that white label opportunity, all that just almost just copy and paste that
Yeah.
into another environment, and then yeah, anybody within your organization can get that structure and that automation, and they'd be
Not only
rocking
that,
just
there's about 600,000 law firms that are small, like 10 attorneys or less. That would love to have a system like that. That's like, wait, it took the phone call, it sent them an email, then it booked the appointment. Okay, and then you would have to train them on the CRM. Be like, okay, after the call, click this button. Great, it just sent them the engagement agreement and the invoice. Right.
cool. So that's I guess in closing, then, is that something that you said you guys are currently building, should be live, and that even might be something that could potentially help other people, other lawyers, other firms in your industry?
Oh yeah, yeah. And so maybe not necessarily for a collateral base, but I'm building it for the law firm because the law firm has a lot more volume. Like with that, it's like people are beefing over a contract, or people are trying to do M&A, or people are like trying to start a company, trying to like sell a company to somebody else, all of those things. And so that's what the law firm handles. And so there's a lot more like the TAM. And so like if we're looking at our TAMs, they're completely different. Like right now it's the silver tsunami. So trying to take advantage of like, okay, there's going to be literally tens of thousands of businesses changing hands in the next 10 years. How do you position yourself to help them? Or, like I said, with lawyers, there's like 600,000 law firms that are trying to track their leads, trying to make their systems better so that they can make more money and do less paperwork. And so like the systems that we can create for them, because they work for us, then we can just be like, hey, we love it. Here you go. Set it up. Call if you need anything. Yeah.
Cool. Great. Well, Tom, thank you so much for all of your time here and the great insight. Again, anyone who's interested can check out your cannabis legalization news podcast on YouTube. You're based in Illinois, but you have a national brand that supports or that helps people across the nation. So thank you for sharing all of that information, and we appreciated having you here.
Appreciate the opportunity, Stephen, and thankful for Lustra Labs for throwing this out there and letting me talk about. Well, I'm not sure if it's a competitor, but it's technology at least.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, have a good one.